Hi, everybody. We're getting close to the winter holidays here, and if you've got little ones at home, you might be thinking about how to keep them occupied during school break. Just in case you're looking for some ideas, here are a few projects that might be fun if you want to spend some time together in the kitchen. These dishes are intentionally a little bit more involved than many of the quicker meals I've cooked in previous videos because I wanted them to be sort of a special activity that can create some fun memories. The age group I mostly had in mind when developing this video was elementary school aged kids, but you can always pick and choose which tasks you turn over to your young assistant based on their age and level of enthusiasm or interest. The educational principles behind these projects are things I learned from wise mentors during an internship cooking with students in the Food Prints program in Washington, D.C. First, it's all about creating opportunities to get really hands on and up close and personal with the ingredients. Being able to see the transformations that take place in the prepping and cooking process, I find, actually adds to the wonder of meals that are tasty and visually appealing because you can see how they started out. This is also nicely aligned with the practice of mindful eating, which encourages us to get closely acquainted with our food. Second, a major goal is to turn over some decision making power to your kid so they can feel a sense of ownership and pride in the final result, as well as develop a sense of autonomy in determining what exactly it is they'd like to eat and then making that a reality. Whoever you've got at home, whether it's just you or a bunch of budding chefs, I hope you find something to love in today's video. I don't have little ones myself, but I definitely found myself tapping into my own inner child a bit while making this food, so I hope you have fun with it. These mini quiches make a great breakfast or brunch food. It's a lot of fun to prepare a bunch of add-ins to choose from, and veggies give your kid cook a chance to practice their knife skills. There are a couple of tasks that are a little bit more advanced that you might want to take care of yourself. One of them is slicing grape tomatoes because that requires a sharp knife. Another one is prepping the leeks. Cut it lengthwise and wash between all of the leaves. Then you can cut off the dark green portions and save them to make veggie stock. Then work your way down the stem, making little crescents. Another thing you might want to do yourself is dicing the potatoes. Just square off a round potato so you have more of a cube than a sphere. You can save the parts of the skin that you cut off to put into mashed potatoes or another thing that you're cooking. Then you can make uniform rows and columns throughout to get these nice, evenly sized dices. Otherwise, you can prepare some ingredients for your assistant to chop up into tiny pieces, including some broccoli florets, mushroom caps, layers of onion, spinach leaves, and fresh parsley. Now you can show them how to hold the knife between their thumb and forefinger and wrap the rest of their fingers around the handle, and then show them the chopping motion, keeping the tip of the knife on the cutting board and sliding it forward. Chopping up these ingredients into really small pieces will keep them busy for quite a while. If they want, they can also use their hands to rip up the spinach leaves and destem and rip the parsley leaves. You can also have them shred a couple different kinds of cheeses. I especially recommend cheddar, mozzarella, and or parmesan. Then, either in sections of a large casserole dish or in separate ramekins, prepare the diced potatoes, mushrooms, broccoli, onions, tomatoes, and leeks, and drizzle olive oil over everything. Roast them in the oven on 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes or until they're sizzling and starting to become golden brown on top. While the veggies are in the oven, combine 7 eggs, half a cup of heavy cream, a pinch each of salt, pepper, and fresh chopped parsley, and beat everything together gently with a fork. Pour the egg mixture into a dozen greased cupcake tins, redistributing until they're uniformly filled. Once the veggies are out of the oven and cooled down a little bit, reduce the oven temperature to 325 degrees. Now comes the fun part. If you're cooking with a kid, let them decide what combinations of ingredients they'd like to try. Some tried and true combos include potato and leek, mushroom and onion, broccoli and cheddar, spinach and tomato, but really anything goes here. Once all the ingredients are added, use a spoon to gently mix everything together in the cupcake tins, and then bake the quiches on 325 for 12 to 15 minutes, or until they're puffed up, no longer jiggly in the middle, and starting to brown on top. Let them cool down until they're okay to touch, and then run a butter knife around each one. Just pop them out onto a plate, and if you want, garnish them with a little bit of fresh parsley. These homemade crackers are a great project for kids, and they last for about 10 days in an airtight container, so they're great for occasional snacking. In a large bowl, mix together the dry ingredients, which are 2.5 cups of whole wheat flour, a third of a cup of uncooked millet, which is a gluten free whole grain that adds a nice texture to the crackers, half a teaspoon each of salt and baking powder. Next, incorporate half a cup of oil with a fork, and then slowly add in the water while kneading the dough. This is a great task to divide up into two simultaneous jobs if you're cooking with someone. I recommend giving the kneading job to a young chef as it's a lot of fun to smush the dough with your hands. Next, sprinkle flour on a clean surface and roll the dough out, trying to get it as thin as possible. Then use cookie cutters, the mouth of a jar, or anything else you can think of to cut the crackers out from the rolled out dough. Keep bunching up and rolling out the extra parts until you've used it all. Next, lay the crackers out onto an ungreased cookie sheet, and if you want, add some garnishes. If you're cooking with kids, I recommend giving them a platter of possibilities that could include things like coarse salt, black pepper, freshly minced garlic, dried herbs like oregano, shredded cheese, or your favorite seasoning blend. You'll probably need two cookie sheets, and if you do, just be sure to switch their position in the oven halfway through baking them for 30 minutes on 350 degrees. Pair these crackers with your favorite dip, like this super easy and incredibly tasty black bean dip that's linked in the video description. Mini pizzas are also a fun way to explore different combinations of toppings and are easy to personalize if you're cooking with multiple kids. I'm making a basic gluten-free crust with almond flour. The recipe I'm using recommends a series of savory seasonings, but I'm omitting those from the crust because I plan to make a couple of sweet pizzas as well, and I want it to go with both sweet and savory toppings. Just beat together 2 eggs and 3 tablespoons of olive oil or melted butter, and then mix that into 1.5 cups of almond flour. Then let the dough chill in the fridge for several minutes, perhaps while you prepare your toppings. Sprinkle a clean surface with more almond flour and turn the dough out onto it. It will probably be pretty sticky still, so gradually add in more almond flour until it stops sticking to everything and holds up better as a ball. Separate the ball of dough into 4 equally sized parts and spread them out into 4 pizzas on greased cookie sheets. Bake the crusts for 6 to 8 minutes, at which point you should see it starting to brown on the top or edges. After letting them cool until they're okay to touch, you or your young assistants can add the toppings. I'm starting with my sweet pizzas. I recommend giving little chefs another platter of possibilities featuring colorful fruits and maybe some chocolate chips. Here, I'm making a fruit salad pizza using strawberry yogurt as the sauce, and I'm not going to rebake this one. My other sweet pizza is more of a dessert pizza, using raspberry preserves as the sauce, with raspberries, shaved coconut, and chocolate chips as the toppings. I am going to rebake this one for a couple more minutes to let the chocolate chips get a little melty. Next up are the savory pizzas. The two sauces are a basil pesto sauce and a tomato sauce, and the ingredient choices I've laid out here are a diced onion, diced green pepper, shredded mozzarella cheese, sliced grape tomatoes, and basil leaves. If you want to make a game out of placing the toppings, play some tic-tac-toe with your kid using the different veggies as the X's and O's. Team Tomato won this one. Once again, just have fun trying out the different combinations. All of these ingredients go great together, so there's really no wrong way to do this. If you've got extra toppings, just throw it into a jar all together to saute later and serve over pasta. So there they are, one basic crust for several very different pizzas. And finally, a really decadent dessert, entirely from scratch. We'll even make our own butter and buttermilk. Start with some heavy whipping cream in a large jar and add in just a pinch of salt. Seal the jar and start shaking. This is a fun job to give to or share with a kid, especially because the transformation is so wondrous to witness. After a while, it might seem like the liquid stops sloshing around and it turns into a whipped cream, and it's not yet where we want it to be. After some more shaking, you'll start to hear some sloshing again as the saturated fat, the butter, starts separating out from the buttermilk. You'll see a bright yellow lump floating in a thin white liquid, and then you'll know it's done. Now we'll just pour the buttermilk into one smaller jar, and it's a good idea to press the butter with a spoon to make sure as much of the liquid is squeezed out as possible. Then you can just spoon the butter into a different jar, and then we've made two separate ingredients from one. I absolutely love doing this because it's just so fascinating. Now we can measure out 10 tablespoons of butter to use in our homemade crust. Next, prepare a bit of iced water and store it in the fridge until you're ready for it. And then add 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, the 10 tablespoons of our freshly made butter, and half a teaspoon of salt to a blender or food processor. Blend or process the mix on slow to medium speed until it takes on a sandy sort of consistency. Then gradually add in some drips of the ice water until it just begins to form into a still crumbly dough. Now, if you've got a little helper baking with you, they get a chance to work those fingers again, kneading the dough until it's nice and smooth and rolled into an even ball. Carefully roll the dough out flat and transfer it to a pie dish. Mine didn't make the trip all in one piece, so I had to do a little bit of extra smooshing, but it turned out just fine, so if this happens to you, don't worry about it at all. Once you're happy with how your crust looks, put it in the fridge to chill. In the meantime, put 2 cups of well-baked sweet potato without the skins, half a cup of softened butter, 1 cup of brown sugar packed firmly into the measuring cup, a quarter cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and a quarter teaspoon of ground ginger to a blender or food processor. Blend it until it's smooth and then add in another quarter cup of buttermilk and 2 lightly beaten eggs. Blend it again until everything's incorporated, and then pour the filling into your chilled pie crust, spreading it out so it has an even top. Stack the pie dish onto a baking sheet and bake it for 10 minutes on 375, and then reduce the temperature to 325 and bake it for another 50 minutes. After you pull the pie out of the oven, let it cool while you make a fluffy marshmallow topping. The first step is going to be to separate out 3 egg yolks from their egg whites. You can do this by carefully cracking the egg and then slowly passing the yolk back and forth between the two halves, letting the egg whites escape into an empty jar. Be careful not to let any of the egg yolk get into the jar because the fat inside the yolk will prevent the egg whites from whipping up properly. Now we can put the egg whites into a glass or metal bowl and use a metal whisk to whip them into a foam. Try to avoid using plastic here because it could have residues that will interfere with the process. If you've got a stand or hand mixer with metal beaters, you can definitely use those on a medium speed, but especially if you're cooking with kids, it's really neat to be able to see the gradual transition of the egg whites into a fluffy meringue just with your own arm power. Plus, it's pretty good exercise. Either way, keep whipping up the egg whites until they form peaks, then very slowly add in half a cup of sugar while you continue whipping the egg whites. This is another job that's better with 2 people. As you keep going, it will start to take on a gorgeous glossy sheen, and the peaks will start to lengthen. For a while, the peaks will slump over to the side, but when they firmly hold their shape, slowly add in 1/3 of a cup of maple syrup and then whip the mixture for about another minute. Then just spread the whole fluffy bowl onto your cooled pie and put it back in the oven for about 15 minutes on 325 or until you see some gentle browning on the top. I am so grateful for Zainab Storms, the baker who came up with this recipe, because this pie is a total delight and is much more achievable than the look of the finished pie might suggest. I hope you found something fun to try out in these recipes, whoever you're cooking for or with. For your budding chefs, be sure to share the wonder of cooking with them by giving them lots of opportunities to get up close and personal with the ingredients and make the decisions that determine the tastes and textures of the final product. Plus, enjoy the benefits of having an extra set of hands to help you out in the kitchen. And for yourself, feed that inner child by giving yourself the permission to just play, have fun, and even be a little silly if you're so inclined. I hope your time in the kitchen brings you lots of joy this holiday season, and see you in the new year. Cheers!